Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, good day to you. Yes, depending where you are in the world. We're doing the nighttime devotion from the devotional Christ Triumphant. The title today: Two disciples went from despair to hope. Luke 24:13 and 14. Two of them went that same day to a village called Emmaus, which was from Jerusalem about threescore furlongs. And they talked together of all these things which had happened. On the first day of the week after Christ's crucifixion, the disciples had everything to fill their hearts with rejoicing. But this day was not a day of joy to all. To some, it was a day of uncertainty, confusion, perplexity. The women brought tidings that positively affirmed that Christ had risen from the dead and that they themselves had seen Jesus alive in the garden. But still the disciples seemed unbelieving. Their hopes had died with Christ. And when the news of his resurrection was brought to them, it was so different from what they had anticipated that they could not believe it. From eyewitnesses, some of the disciples had obtained quite a full account of the events of Friday. Others beheld the scenes of the crucifixion with their own eyes. In the afternoon of the first day of the week, which we know as Sunday, two of the disciples, restless and unhappy, decided to return to their home in Emmaus, a village about 8 miles from Jerusalem. They had not advanced far on the journey when they were joined by a stranger. But they were so absorbed in their gloom and disappointment that they didn't observe him that closely. They continued their conversation, expressing the thoughts of their hearts. Jesus knew that their hearts were bound up with him in love, and he longed to take them in his arms and wipe away their tears and put joy and gladness in their hearts. But he must first give them lessons that they would never forget. They told him of their disappointment in regard to their master, how the chief priests and the rulers delivered him to be condemned to death and crucified him. With hearts sore with disappointment, with quivering lips, they said, "We trusted that it had been he which should have redeemed Israel. And beside all this, today is the third day since these things were done." Why did not the disciples remember Christ's words and realize that events were to be as they had been? Why did not they realize that the last part of his disclosure would be just as verily fulfilled as the first part, that the third day he would rise again? This was the part they should have remembered. The priests and rulers did not forget this. The title again: Two disciples went from despair to hope. So this is focusing on women had seen Jesus when he came from the tomb, and they ran and told the disciples. And as we all know, the disciples ran to the tomb, didn't see him, and they weren't sure themselves, even though Jesus did tell them, "On the third day I will rise." But they didn't know anything of this. Yes, they'd seen him resurrect Lazarus and the other couple of, the girl and whoever else he did, but it was unheard of, and they weren't sure. And of course, then he had doubting Thomas. When the disciples had seen him, he had Thomas, who then said, "Well, I wasn't here, so I'm not sure about this." And then Jesus appeared, and we know the story. But just like everyone else, and as we are as well, seeing is believing. We cannot live like that. That is lacking, severely lacking faith. We know that in the Bible, if the Bible says something, it is going to happen, because everything so far that has been prophesied by the Bible has happened. There's only a few more things to go. The disciples did not believe. So when they eventually were walking, when he joined them walking on the road to Emmaus, they didn't discern that it was Jesus. And he didn't reveal himself straight away either. It wasn't until some time along the journey he did actually reveal himself to them. But it hasn't told us that here yet, because Jesus wanted to take a little bit of time. He wanted to find out what they knew, how they felt. Basically, they should have remembered what he had said about him rising from the dead. But everyone was so focused on his death, and that was the only thing they were kind of familiar with and they'd experienced. And no one had ever witnessed or knew that you can rise from the dead. But of course, we can't do that. Only God can do that for us. And that was all new to them. We have the hindsight of the Bible and historical facts. They didn't necessarily have that then. Just how privileged we are to have their testimony. The Bible, the testimony of Jesus, the testimony of the disciples. We have scientific facts proving all this to be true. And still, majority of the world don't believe. That's very sad.